Hey, this is Ken Live with My Home Options. Super glad to have you here, and I'm super excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be talking about how to sell your house without a realtor. Now, this is going to be part one of a two-part series. Today, we're going to be talking all about the contracts, so you can really understand the contract that you're going to be using if you're in Texas. As of today, they do update this contract. And then the second part, you're going to be talking all about the process, really from a 30,000 foot perspective, and some of the do's and the don'ts. So if you're ready to see that contract, we will get right into it. So before I jump into the meat and potatoes of this video, it is important for me to say that this is not legal advice. We cannot be held liable over here at My Home Option for this information. We do recommend that you talk to an attorney before you dive into contracts, but we're going to tell you the best that we know. We're going to tell you what's worked for us, and hopefully it gets you a huge leg forward on your contracts. Just had to say that before we jumped into it. So this is going to be a contract over the 1 to 4 family residencies within Texas. This is from the Texas Real Estate Commission. That's the contract that we're going to be looking over. If you need that contract, there's going to be a link down in the description below. You can, I'd recommend pulling that up and kind of reading and skimming through that contract as I'm going through it here on my computer, kind of describing some of these different things. I would recommend that you have that up. And this is for single families, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. It's not for big farmland. It's not for multifamilies or commercials. It's not for condos or any of those type of things. Just for kind of your standard house and standard neighborhood, maybe with a little bit of land, but not massive amounts of land where it's actually a farm. There's different things that go with that, and then obviously more units, just different things. So there's going to be a link, like I said, in the description to the Trek 1 to 4 family contract. So make sure you check that out. I'd recommend pull it up right now. You can even pause the video, pull it up, and go through that video or go through that contract as we're discussing it on this video. And this is only really applicable to Texas. This is the Texas Real Estate Commission's contract that they just came out with. I believe it was April 2021 that they came out with this, so it's fairly new at the time of this recording. I like some of the updates that they've done in this contract, but they do change that from time to time, so this video could become outdated at some point. But as of right now, it is up to date. And if you want up, this is going to be kind of a 30,000 foot approach to this contract. But if you're really wanting a detailed, look at this contract, let me know down in the comments if that's something that you'd like to see, and we can make sure that we get something together for you to really arm you with all the information possible. Before we jump right into it, there's a couple things we had to talk about here, sorry. But one more thing is I want to talk some vocabulary. There's addendums and amendments. An addendum is an addition to a contract. An amendment is a change to a contract. So you might hear me say those two terms. I didn't want you to get confused, but addendum is an addition to the contract. An amendment is a change to the contract. So with that, I think we're ready to jump in. Now, one quick note is it's going to be a little bit different whether you're working with just a normal buyer or if you're looking to work with an investor buyer. So we'll kind of go back and forth through those different scenarios as we jump through these, if it's applicable. If it's not, we'll just talk about it, and we won't even mention the two different ways of operating and looking at it. So let's get into it. First thing you're going to see there on your contract is going to be the parties. And so basically when you're, it's the buyers and the sellers. I hope that's, fairly obvious. But the seller is going to be probably you watching this video. The buyer is going to be the other person who's looking to buy the house. It is important here to note though that the seller is not, it can't be like a family member or something. It has to be the name on the deed. That's the name of the seller. If there's somebody acting on behalf of the seller, sometimes that falls under like an estate deal. That's different. We can talk about that in another video. This might be where there might have to be a power of attorney involved for a family member. So if it's any of those kind of odd situations where it's not the person on the deed that's going and involved as the seller in the contract, like a power of attorney, make sure you talk to an attorney ahead of time. so you can really get that dialed in. They can make sure your contract is drafted up appropriately. You've got all your I's dotted, your T's crossed, or there's a good chance that you'll get to the closing table and you will not be able to close. It's actually happened to me one time back when I was doing more on the investing side. We had a deal. We were literally day of closing, and then there was something weird that came up with the power of attorney, and we weren't able to close it. Everybody was pretty frustrated because it's just been a long process even to get to that point. But I learned my lesson, and learn the lesson not the hard way, learn it the easy way. Make sure you get an attorney involved on the front end of a power of attorney situation, and get everything figured out ahead of time. So, and then also what I recommend whenever you're going to an attorney is I would contact the title office that you're planning to work with. They will have an attorney, and use that attorney to help you draft up the contract and anything needed to go along with this, so that way you have a smooth process all the way through. Because if their attorney drafts it and then they're doing the title work, it just makes it a lot simpler than if you're trying to use a different attorney than the title office and they have mix-ups and they want to do things different. That just keeps you really simple. So that's on parties. For the property, the legal description can be found at the county's appraisal district. So if you're in Tarrant County, for example, you could just Google Tarrant County Appraisal District, and it should come up, Tarrant Appraisal District, something like that. I think Tarrant County, for example, might be like tad.org, tad.org, I believe. I think it's .org. But yeah, just look up your county. So whatever county you're in, Johnson County Appraisal District, Tarrant County Appraisal District, Dallas County Appraisal District, Hill County Appraisal District, whatever, so on and so forth. Look that up. You can then search for your property address or the owner name or something like that. You'll be able to find the legal description, and that's where you can kind of fill that out for that contract. The next, tier, the next space you're going to see is the sales price. There's a couple of different, breakouts underneath sales price. There's going to be a cash portion, a finance portion, and then you're going to have the total of the above lines. Now, this is where something might be a little bit different between an investor buyer and just a normal buyer. So an investor buyer is typically going to be buying all cash, but there are situations where they might be doing like an owner finance or subject to, both of those kind of wrapped up in creative financing. We talk about that in another video if you're curious about that. But typically, your standard investor is going to be buying with cash, whereas your standard normal buyer is going to be buying financing, and they're going to be getting financing from a bank. And so, but let's just say, for example, that you have a buyer that's doing they're buying your house for $200,000. You'd go ahead and put the total $200,000, and let's say they're putting 10% down, which would be $20,000. Then you would put $20,000 in the cash portion, and you'd put $180,000 in the financing portion, and then you would just mark off if they're doing financing, a loan assumption, or a seller finance addendum, and then you would mark that at the bottom of the contract. We'll get to that, and then you would attach that addendum to your contract when you send it over to the title office. So that's on sales price. On leases, that's going to be your next section. We're not going to dive into this on this video, but if you're looking for a more in-depth video, go check it out. We should be creating that more in-depth video pretty soon, especially if you let me know in the comments if that's something that you're interested in looking at. Then the next section is going to be your earnest money and the termination option period. I actually really like this. They just updated this contract, like I said, and I think that this is in a really good position, and they've kind of brought the option money and the earnest money together. So on this, you're going to see first earnest money, and it's going to say deliver to the escrow agent. This is the person who's working at the title office, and then it's going to ask for the location of the title office, and then you put your amount of earnest, and then down below that you put your amount for option. Now let's talk about earnest fee and option fee. I'm not going to dive too deep into it, but it is important right here to note that the earnest fee is typically a larger amount that is given back to the buyer if they back out of the contract before the end of the option period. Typically, the option money is completely forfeited. Is long, but that's the only thing that they lose as long as they back out during that option period. So typically your option money is smaller, your earnest money is larger. So let's just say your option money might be $100, and then your earnest fee might be $1,000. And it might give the buyer a chance to say, hey, my option period is going to be 10 days. During that time, I can get inspections and all that kind of stuff. And if something comes up and we can't come to an agreement on repairs, then I only lose $100. But if they go over that 10 days, then now they have the $1,000 of earnest money on the table, as well as the $100 of option money. So they're out of pocket $1,100 if they try to back out of the contract after the option period is over. So it's important to understand the difference between those. Then there's going to be another spot where you can put additional earnest if there's going to be additional earnest required at a later point. And then there's also going to be the field where you make sure you fill in your termination option, which basically just says how long does the buyer have in their option period before their earnest money is then forfeited because the option period is over. That's probably going to be somewhere between like 5 and 10 days. If you're working with an investor buyer, they may have no options. Some investor buyers have long options. It just depends. Everybody does it a little bit differently. But you've got to make sure you understand what you're comfortable with. You got to understand why a buyer wants it long or short or whatever, and just figure out what works best for you. The next section you're going to see is title policy and survey. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in the in-depth video that we do. But really, if we're looking at this from an investor perspective versus a normal buyer perspective, investor buyer is typically not going to need a survey, and the title policy is going to be paid out by the buyer or by them as the investor. With a normal buyer, it could go either way, and they probably will require a survey. Now, sometimes you can use an old survey, or sometimes a new survey is going to be required. That just kind of depends on a few different factors, but that's kind of what's in that section there. Then there's some objections and general notices. Make sure you read through all those and you understand what's on the contract, but we're not going to dive into it in this video. The next section is property condition. You're going to be talking about here, there's the seller's disclosure that will come up there and talk about making sure that the seller's disclosure is done by you as the seller, which just gives a bunch of information. You can check out the seller's disclosure addendum on a separate video. We'll walk through really what that disclosure is and how to fill that out. There's also going to be a lead-based paint disclosure. If your house was built before 1978, you have to fill that out. We can talk through that on another video as well and walk you through how to fill out that addendum. Then there's also going to be if you have any initial repairs requested at the time of signing that contract. Now, that doesn't mean you cannot do a repair amendment during the option period. You can always amend the contract if both parties agree to it. But this is like if you know that there's something that needs to be done before you even go under contract, you could put those repairs done right here. Next section, you have the broker and sales agent. So basically, if the buyer or the seller, if either party of this transaction is an agent, a real estate agent, or a broker, they have to disclose that information right there on the broker and sales agent, section. And then if there's like any sort of like family ties or anybody involved, there's some other, specific situations where that is applicable, but you can kind of read that and understand from the text that's put there. The next section is going to be closing. Now, this date in Texas specifically is an on or before date. So let's just say that your closing date was June 1st of 2021. You would be perfectly able to close on, May 28th of 2021 if both parties are ready to close, title company was ready to close, the lender was ready to close. Typically, it doesn't happen early, but if everybody's ready to close early, then you can definitely go ahead and do that. So the contract allows you to close on or before that date, but not after. So if you actually ended up, something happened, maybe with title or financing or something like that, and you had to close on June 5th, of 2021, when you had originally agreed to close on June 1st of 2021, you would have to actually write up an amendment that changed the contract's closing date and extended it. But you can get that contract on Trek's website as well. And then also it's going to talk about in that section of closing what happens after the property is closed, and some specific things there. Make sure you go and check that out. The next section is going to be possession. So there's really kind of two options that can be checked off here. Typically, if you're just dealing with a standard normal buyer, it's going to be upon closing and funding. Something important to note here is you are not closed on this property, and the property does not go from you as the seller to ownership of the buyer until the deal has funded and you have your money. So even if the buyer has signed, even if they've paid their money, if they're paying their money to title and then title's going to pay out you as a seller, even if they've paid their money to title and they have signed contracts, until title sends you your check and you have your money, you have your check or you have your wire or anything like that, the property does not change ownership. So make sure that you're not giving up your ownership ahead of time, because there are some situations where deals fall through right there after everybody's signed. It's happened to me before, it's happened to other people before. So it's important that you maintain possession until you have received funding. That just protects you throughout this process. But there is another, option there, and it's according to a TREC. Temporary residential lease is what they call it. I want to make sure I get that wording right. What I would call it, what most investors call, is a lease back. It's basically where you can live rent free. So if you sold your house to an investor buyer, they might do what's called a lease back and give you 30 days for free inside of your house. If you're curious more about a lease back, we've actually got investors that we are connected with who do lease backs. So if you're saying, hey, I want to sell my house, but I don't want to have to move right away, I want to be able to sell, have the cash, and then be able to go out into the market as a cash buyer to do what I need to do, or have 30 days to move out or whatever, we can connect you with an investor who specializes in that. Or if you're curious about lease backs, you can check out one of our other videos that goes more in depth onto lease backs. But that is it for the possession section. The special provision section is next. This is not to be used that often. We have another video where we'll talk about what goes in this special provisions. But basically, if there isn't anything extra that has to be said within the contract, don't put anything here. If there is something that specifically applies to the sale, it specifically applies to that contract that has to be said there, you can say it there, but it's not supposed to be wordy or lengthy. It's only factual statements. It's short, sweet, to the point, and that's just really more for everybody's protection, that things, as long as it's straightforward and to the point. If you put something in there wrong, you can change the contract. If you put something in there that's super wordy, it can become confusing, and you're not protected. So straight and to the point. If you have to say something, if you don't put it there. The next thing is settlement and other expenses. So look and just make sure that you, as a seller, aren't paying any amounts to the buyers. And if you are paying any amounts to the buyers, that is fine. But just make sure you understand what you're paying to the buyers for different expenses, how much. 13 through 20 is tax and legal stuff, those sections. So we'll talk about those more in the full breakdown. Make sure you still read those and check those out. But we're not going to go into depth on this video. The next thing is notices. This is just where you're going to get information as you are supposed to get information along the process of the transaction. The next section is agreement of parties. So this is going to be all those addendums. Like I said, the attachments to the contracts, they're going to get put right here. So that way everybody has the information that's supposed to be tied to the 1 to 4 contract. But we got videos and links to other addendums, or you can check out TREC's website. They've got some little descriptions there and a bunch of different addendums on there. Then there's going to be an attorney area to sign if you're going to be using an attorney. We recommend it, but you don't have to. There's lots of people that don't use attorneys, but it is a really good way to protect yourself as well. So there's a give and take there, but it is going to cost. So, that's why a lot of people don't end up using an attorney here. And then there's a place for you and the buyer to sign and fill in the date of signing. Note, this is not the date of closing. This is the date of execution. So this, you'd write there on that executed on whatever date. That's the date that you're signing the contract right then and there. And And then there's going to be an info page for if you're using a real estate agent, that they'll fill in their information there. And there's going to be a receipt page for option money, earnest money, other things like that. So make sure you're filling all that out correctly. So in closing, I know that was a lot to cover. We covered that really quickly, but there's going to be some other videos that you can check out that apply, some other videos on addendums. There's going to be more in-depth on this entire contract. It'll be a lot longer, but make sure that you're checking out our entire channel, subscribing to our channel for more information. If there's anything else that you need, remember this is part one of a two-part series. So in the next video, like I said, we're going to be talking about the process from a 30,000 foot perspective. We're going to be talking about some of those do's and don'ts. And remember, you can always go to myhomeoption.com. We can connect you with good title companies. We can connect you with awesome investors who can do leasebacks, like I was saying. We can connect you with awesome investor buyers who can get you through this process easy and seamlessly, protect your best interest, and all of that good stuff. So thanks for hanging out with us today. I hope that video was informative, and we'll see you on part 2.